as Sher, as I had been for a while unless your family, and then I'm still known as Cheryl. And I've been in Tairua permanently for over 40 years now, but my first introduction was with my parents who rented a batch on Ocean Beach Road. And it was 1959-60, and there was my sister, myself and my parents. It was Norton's batch, and they stayed in this town as well. And there was no power, the causeway wasn't in, and the town was quiet, there was cockles in the bay, and I think we all fell in love with it then, and Dad bought a section on the beach that was for sale at the time. And we proceeded to come back for camping holidays at the Pepe Park, under the pine trees. We camped at Mary Beach Reserve, and we camped on the section on the beach. And then our association got more permanent when Dad built a batch in 1970, and we started bringing our children and holidaying here. And then in 1980 I moved here permanently for a short time. The kids started school at Tairua School. They were 10 and 8 then, and we went overseas, and then Dad thought he'd sell the batch because I was gone, and so we thought, oh well, we'll buy the batch because we love Tairua, and I moved home to Tairua permanently in 1982. So I'm 73 now, and I just love living in Tairua. And then Ray moved here in 1983.
Yeah, so I'm Ray Finn. I came here in 1983, driving through, delivering a load of pottery for my mother up to Ferry Landing, to a pottery shop that was up there, and she was giving me a hard time about not working at the time, and I called into the sawmill, asked if there was a job going in the maintenance crew, and they said yes, and that was the start of my time in Tairua. I stayed there for about 7 years, I think it was, when it was a full-on sawmill with, I think there was 14 guys in the fitter's shop. We were making everything for the sawmill, and he had Kaitaia sawmill as well, which we used to fly up and down to, install gear up there, do their maintenance, and
come back and land on the airstrip there, which was quite hairy sometimes.
Yeah, had the odd landing where there's a carbine at each end of the airstrip with the lights on to come into, coming in storms, bits and pieces where we probably shouldn't have been flying, but added to the entertainment of the place, and always straight into the Sir George grave for a shot of whiskey afterwards.
And the Sir George grave played a big part in all our lives. When I first came to town as an Aucklander, I didn't know anyone, but we came in winter, so we went to the pub, and anyone basically at the pub was a local in winter because tourism was non-existent almost, and so everyone you met was a local, and so that was how we all forged friendships. And there was other things like netball fun days and the rugby club, and the rugby team was very strong, and so you would meet people at the rugby club as well, and that was every Saturday in the winter was just huge games, and everyone stayed for the feed afterwards, and there was socials and the netball fun days. Everyone played together in mufti. People would get very injured because they were teams with males and females, and rugby team and netball team and anyone else in between. People would stomp on your feet, and there were sprains, and everyone was drinking as well at the same time. So yeah, and the rugby games, everyone had couches on the back of their utes and crates of beer, and it was all very social. And of course we were here before there was a policeman. Niki Pakipaki was our first policeman, and so the Sir George grey, you'd have nights where everyone just poured out at 10 o'clock. 10 o'clock closing was very social.
So it was always a party after 10 o'clock at someone's house. So it was straight into the bottle store, load up, and if the tide was out, there was quite often a dozen cars driving around on the mud flats trying to find their way to the party, or stopping and getting a feed of puppies and heading off to the party. and
Everyone came to
Everyone
the
came.
parties, didn't
Yeah,
they?
yeah.
The publican, the staff, and they're always open home, so nobody shut the door. And if people heard the music, people would just rock up, you know. So if you had the mill crowd, there was often guitars from the Maori boys. So it was very, very social. Plus we had the post office where we all went for our mail all the time. So you all met every day to pick up your mail. You know, it was like, g'day, how's it going? And May Finlay was the postmistress, and she looked after a lot of the finances for some of the older chaps in the mill who would have maybe spent all their money and not had any food. So as they were allowed to in those days, they looked after their bank accounts for them and divvied it out to keep them going, and very much a sense of community. We all knew who lived where, who was who, and then we had the shops. We had the post office, the BNZ, the picture theatre.
Picture theatre, yeah.
The picture theatre was fun.
Picture theatre was always, summer it was so hot, and in the winter you had to take a blanket with you.
Or a hot water bottle.
And choose your row seats because they were renowned for falling over.
And people would fall asleep and you'd be like, be quiet so-and-so, because they'd be snoring. So, you know. Or I even got told off for talking, you know, Mrs. So-and-so, be quiet, and all the kids were like, you got told off, you know.
And the Sir George Grey was, pool night was Wednesday night, and there would be 50 to 60 people there. Friday night was always just a good session. Saturday night was normally a band, and we were lucky enough to have a really good band, local boys, that played all the parties. And
the Van Jarswell brothers, and and again that was a cross section. Being from Auckland, I had never gone to a pub where you socialised with everybody, from your town drinkers to your older people to your young people. So you got to meet them all and didn't judge, which was really nice. And the town was very safe. Nobody locked anything. We never had crime. And even though there was no policeman, if someone did something, I had a party once and somebody knocked over the neighbour's fence, but you know, the next day, everyone came back and put the fence back up again. That was the way it was. You know, there was no, and the neighbours never complained. There was no one to complain to. So you never got shut down by noise control because there was no noise control. And if someone had a gripe, they'd come and see you the next day. And you know, so it was all very personal, and very supportive on that level. Yeah. Alan and Margaret Wilson owned the Four Square, and the Lermans owned the takeaway bar next to it, and then eventually the Four Square expanded and the takeaway bar moved further up the shops.
So where the Four Square and the takeaway were, there was a gap we used to drive down between and went to the next load of shops onto the
And it had a big frontage too, off the road. And then I worked in the takeaway bar that is where the bakery is now. And you would have queues from that takeaway bar all the way back to the pub on a Friday night. And he made his homemade chips. And he was a real character, Gary Cooper. He passed away much too young, but he was just the best. And Ray had a tea bucket. So he was a hot rod boy, and that would light it. He would leave town after the pub, and my boss used to like to light a cigarette and pour a rum and coke, and we'd sit outside the fish and chip shop and listen to Ray's tea bucket, leave town.
I lived up Spur Road, which is right up in the hills.
And
he used to say to me he could hear my tea bucket, because at that stage the V8 350 Chevy, no plugs in the pipe, just straight pipes, and he could hear me go all the way home and turn on to the metal and start just wheel spinning up the metal track.
Wow.
Right.
But your trick was to do things like park it in the main street, either by the pub or the Four Square, and light up the tyres. There was no loss of traction rules in those days. And if it was a good westerly blowing, fill up the pub until everyone was coughing and spluttering, had to come outside.
Empty the public bar at Sir George Grey on Saturday afternoon.
And then you'd give the kids rides up the causeway because you could put the foot down and there was no traffic and no pedestrians, and do little speed laps up and down the causeway. Yeah.
And no policemen. And no phones to film you.
Exactly.
Yeah, and then summer, of course, in the pub was the band. The big bands used to come and they put the marquee up out the back, and the pub would just be absolutely chock-a-block, and the ferry would come from Pawanui, and but the wharf would be sunk with the amount of people on it, so they'd be standing in water about this deep because the pontoons would just be pushed down so far, and then they would just pour up, and then they would come off at the wharf and they'd walk up past Andrea and Phil's Petley Parade up there, and everyone that lived there would sit outside all night long because there was a bit of kind of like knock your letterbox down or put things on, fruit in your letterbox and stuff like that. So they would just sit and socialise and greet everybody as they went past. And yeah, the band nights in the pub through the summer were huge.
You'd have up to 2,000 people in the garden bar. At that stage, used to roll all the way down to the water's edge.
Best garden bar in New Zealand, really. Yeah.
And you'd get people rowing across from Pawanui in dinghies, load up with beer, get halfway back, sink, and just have to swim home.
And working at Tannis, I worked at Tannis Silma after a couple of years of knowing Ray. I got a job out there at the retail yard, worked there for a few years, and that was very social too because you knew all the workers, and you had functions from Tannis Silma, had their big Christmas do's, and that was always fun. Had cricket games and trips to Kaitaia with the crews.
Yeah, very social.
Yeah, and then after Tannis Sawmill, I worked at the garage, which was BP at the time. I worked there. I had, what else did we? Then we went away in our motorhome. You worked over the hill a few times.
Yeah, worked for Carter Holt maintenance over there, and Gow Smith engineering in Puri.
I worked in the Foursquare. Then I opened out of the Blue Cafe. Had that for a while till I sold that. And you opened Tairua
Steelcraft, which I had for
10 years.
10, 12 years or something.
So living in a small town makes you do things you'd never do in other lives. I would have never believed I would dock sheep or, you know, done all these things as a job, cooking fish and chips, and yeah, it's been great. And my two girls grew up here, went to Thames High, moved on. One daughter's come back and lived here and raised her daughter here, who now goes to school here. Well, she's older now, she'll be 21, and she's gone off to going to nursing school. But yeah, it's been a really lovely life to be in Tairua, and we've really enjoyed it. We're involved in trapping, so we look after the bird life, and I started that with Whenuakiri Kiwi Care, and Ray's moved into that now. And
he's free Tairua, so it takes up a bit of my time by doing trap lines, walking in the bush.
We can talk about the mill. Can you give us some detail as to what type of timber you were dealing with, and how far did you metabolise that timber down into, and was it dressed or undressed, or was it ground treated? Or
started with Mr. Tanner, the father. Starting it was a pole sawmill, just doing posts, and then Alan and Ken, the sons, took over the business and grew it into a proper sawmill, and they could cut 7'2" length. Most sawmills were cutting 6 metres, so they could cut a specialised size, and that grew. They had planers, so they were doing the whole tannalising and everything. It was a full-on sawmill.
Mainly pine
Yeah, it was all
and Douglas
pine.
fir.
Yeah, and some Douglas fir that they used to do. And with the sawmill that they bought up in Kaitaia, they could do up to, I think it was 12 metre cut up there. And so they did a lot of Douglas fir beams when that was all the rage up there. We built all the equipment for planer mills, and both sawmills, upgraded that. Built truck bodies, for them, everything, general engineering, and then they opened the engineering shop actually to the public for a while, so we were doing all sorts of repairs for the public in Tairua with boats. When I was there, I think there was 100 people employed by the sawmill, and they had their own trucks, which Alan still has, trucks, bits and
They
pieces.
expanded their retail yards at their height. They had a retail yard in Whitianga, Whangamata, Tairua, Auckland, Cable Bay, Kaitaia. So they were really quite a large company in those
When did
days.
it close?
In the 90s?
In the 90s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't remember the exact date.
Mm.
They started retrenching to Kirapehi. Alan Tanner bought Kirapehi, the old dairy factory.
The old dairy factory.
And he was going to move all the tannalising and everything to there.
Yeah.
Ken moved on and had Porcupine.
Bought Porcupine and expanded
Yeah.
that. And his sons still run that down there.
Oh.
No, it was a really entertaining time.
The pub was super friendly, not a real stickler for rules, but never any problems. And yeah, so Alan and Margaret Wilson had the Foursquare when I first came to town, and they were great. Archie and Sally Curran had the other dairy on the corner where the vet clinic is now, and Gary Cooper had the takeaway bar, and I think Pam and Ken Lerman had the other takeaway bar. Yeah, I mean they were all part and parcel, and Roger and Pat Turner had Pacific Harbour, and got to know, they were sort of took us under their wing when I first came to town, and introduced my ex to diving and shared their knowledge of the area, and because they'd been here forever. And when you first came to town, you stayed with Paul Hill, who later on became a councillor out Spur Road, and then you moved into town on a batch on the beach, which has now been pulled down, but it was a great batch, wasn't it?
Yeah, it had a big platform on the roof, so viewing deck and party deck, so yeah, it was a good little old spot there.
It was just all the little old batches then, there wasn't any big houses, and yeah. Surf club, had different factions, didn't it? Because the surfies didn't like the people who ran the surf club, and so there was factions there, and then the surfies didn't like the rugby players. It was all just banter and fun, really. But it just was that whole division, yeah. And most of the mill boys played rugby. We probably had a better rugby team in those days because of all the mill workers. So that was a big source of big, strong guys that played rugby.
Yeah, farm workers, the Hikawai farm workers, and
yeah. We probably had more contact with the farmers in those days because they used to come to the pub, they come to the rugby club, and so you actually knew all the people from Hikawai as well. I mean, there was one restaurant in town called Hungry Friends. That was our first little restaurant, and that was run by Danny and Joan Boglin. Joan went on to teach at the school, and Danny used to mow lawns, and it was all full of stuffed animals, wasn't it? And paintings of animals. And yeah, so if you want to have a meal out, you went there, but we would do things like I'd take a bottle of rum and you'd take a bottle of bourbon. And then we asked the waitress for oysters for dessert. She didn't like that idea.
She wouldn't serve us that. No. Yeah. And baked Alaska, that was his speciality. But he would run out of vanilla ice cream, and I can remember getting lime ice cream, baked Alaska,
Which was really different.
It was interesting.
After a bottle of rum, that didn't really matter. That was perfect.
Yeah. And Kevin and Bev McIntosh had the big hardware store, which is now where Gold Diggers Liquor Shop is.
Oh, yeah.
So that was a very comprehensive hardware shop that kind of kept everyone going with their bits and pieces. Yeah. And of course there was no shops on the other side of the road.
Yeah, there was a mini pub on that side, which got turned into
Got to upgrade,
upgrade,
didn't it? Yeah.
turned into the Tiger Woods mini pub.
Waigatuds.
Waigatuds, that's right.
Yeah.
Waigatuds.
Yeah.
Well done. We've really appreciated your input, and you've obviously enjoyed your life in Tairua,
Oh,
and
yeah.
that's
Yeah.
and that's
No,
outstanding. We really appreciate you sharing that with us, and thanks for being such great people.
Oh, you're
Well
welcome.
done.